these money scripts that are kind of pre-programmed in our head based on our family, our culture, our friends, our upbringing, everything. Mm-hmm. And so it's important to investigate, where is this thought coming from? Because it's probably not technically from you.
Welcome to the Student Loan Podcast.
Here, you'll find practical advice on tackling student loan debt, paying down your higher education expenses,
and inspiring stories about paying off student loans. We're your hosts, Daphne Vanessa
and Shamil Rodriguez.
Hello, everyone, and welcome again to the Student Loan Podcast. Today's interview guest is Melanie Lockert, who is the founder and author of both the book and blog, Dear Debt. She paid over $80,000 of student loan debt. Such an inspiring story, and we are so grateful to have her on our podcast so that we can share her message with everyone. And I think just for me, Shamil, what I really loved about this episode was her sharing the mental health aspects of student loan debt. It's something that people don't talk a lot about. So I really appreciate going into this, and I'm excited to share it with our audience.
I would have to agree with you 100%. This was a really exciting podcast. Melanie shared some great tips on how to cope, but most importantly, she just shared some of those details that you don't hear very often. And that's really our goal here, is to make sure that the audience, the listeners, are getting some benefit out of these podcasts. And I think Melanie really brought some great advice to share. And I think it's going to be fun for people to see. And she also founded, now what she's doing is also the mental health and wealth blog and podcast. So she didn't stop with just paying off her debt, but I really appreciated that she continued to figure out ways to help people in the community, which is really interesting. She's going to go over that as well. And then Daphne, isn't there something that you said you wanted to share, or should the audience listen about the prize they may receive at the end of the podcast? How's that going to work?
That's a great idea. You guys listen through to the episode, but at the end of the episode, we have something really exciting, a prize that we will be offering. So stay tuned to find out what that is and the takeaways.
All right, so let's get started. Let's turn it over to Melanie.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. I'm super excited to be here. So my story really starts, let's go back 8 years ago, 2012. I had just graduated from NYU in 2011. And then, by 2012, I had moved to Portland, Oregon, because I couldn't afford to live in New York anymore. And, I just had this kind of reckoning of, I owe all of this money, all of these student loans, and I can't afford to live in New York anymore. And I thought that the job situation would be better in Portland. And then all of 2012, I just found temp jobs making $10 to $12 an hour. And in total, by the time I graduated NYU, I had $68,000 in debt. In total, I paid off $81,000 because I went to school at 2 different times, one for my BA, one for my MA. And then even with interest, it's probably closer to 6 figures. So when you really consider, close to 6 figures of debt, I just felt so depressed. Like, how am I ever going to pay this off when I'm just making $10 to $12 an hour? I can't even find a full-time job. And so I kind of refer to 2012 as just like my lost year. I just felt like I was just crying and upset and just kind of spinning my wheels, feeling like, how am I ever going to get out of this debt? And one thing that was driving me literally crazy was that no one was talking about the mental health effects of student loan debt. And I was like, am I the only one that feels extremely anxious about this? Like, it really actually makes me physically ill to owe someone money. And, I spent all of 2012 really just in a really dark place. And it was situational depression for sure, because it was all about my student loans.
Right.
And, by the end of the year, I thought, I need to change something because I can't continue like this. Like, what if I channeled all of this energy and me crying and me being upset into actually trying to pay it off.
Love it.
And so I started my blog, Dear Debt, in January 2013 as a way to keep myself accountable in the debt payoff process. So I started Dear Debt. I was chronicling my journey every single month about what I was paying, my side hustles for that month, what I was going through.
Yep.
I wrote breakup letters to debt. So the concept
Yes.
of Dear Debt. Yeah. The concept of Dear Debt is kind of,
Yep.
Based on Dear John. So you can write, fun breakup letters to debt. And, and I invited other people in the community to write breakup letters to debt as well. And so, over the months, the blog grew, and people kept telling me, oh, I feel the same way as you. Like, I totally relate. And so many people came out of the woodwork just telling me that they feel the same way, that they're experiencing, mental anguish and anxiety and depression because of their student loans too. And it was just a huge revelation to me that, here I was thinking that I was the only one that was so upset by my student loans. And granted, this is, 2013. So a lot has happened since then. I think the student loan bubble and the conversation has really hit its apex now. But back then it was still kind of like people knew it was a problem, but like it hadn't hit its apex yet where it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a problem. And, through the blog, I was able to keep myself accountable, and in a weird way, it led to different side hustles. So the main way that I paid off my debt is through side hustling. So a lot of people, ask me like, what's the secret sauce? What did you do? And I'll be honest, like the main thing for me was earning more because I was already a minimalist.
Yep.
I was already sharing a studio apartment with my then partner. Yep. My rent was $400 a month. I didn't have health insurance. I didn't have a car. I literally had the bare essentials. And so I was like, I can't dip any further, like unless I stop eating and move back home.
Right.
And so, I was like, the only option I have is to earn more. And so, I think that frugality is a really great entry point into personal finance and into debt repayment. But I think a lot of people can have all this excitement and then hit a wall fairly quickly, especially if you're like me, where I don't have anything to sell. Like I don't have much to cut back on. And so I had to earn more. And then, through the blog, I realized, oh, other bloggers are making money as writers for other sites.
Right.
And I was like, well, I have a master's degree. I read a lot of papers in school. Like, maybe I can try this. And I just started pitching. And then I was able to get more and more clients. And, to make a very long story short, I quit my nonprofit job that I eventually found. After 2 years, I found a nonprofit job. $31,000.
Never mind that you went to NYU.
I know. And then, so a year after I finally got the job, I quit to be self-employed because I was making enough on the side through writing, as I was in my day job. And so I essentially doubled my income from 30 grand to 60 grand. And, to have my expenses remain that low really helped me move the debt forward. And so I paid off all of my debt December 2015. I wrote a book.
2 years?
Yeah. Well, not exactly. So the long story is I paid off $81,000 in 9 years.
Okay.
The kind of sexier story is that I paid off $68,000 in 4.5 years. So I didn't really get, passionate about paying off debt until I graduated NYU. And so, I had $68,000 by the time I graduated, and, so I paid that off in 4.5 years. And then it was about, 2-3 years of blogging that really kind of helped me move the needle forward. And, I was able to write a book in 2016 about my experience and do a bunch of other things. And nice. It's been a lot.
Love it. Let's talk about the breakdown of like what your debt looked like, just for somebody who's going through it so that they can kind of analogize. What did your debt makeup profile look like? Subsidized versus unsubsidized, interest rates? What were you looking at in terms of amortization schedules? Where were you with, what did your mountain look like essentially?
Yeah, so I actually don't know the specific like subsidized versus unsubsidized, but what I do know is that I borrowed $23,000 for my undergrad.
Okay.
And I do remember that I didn't realize that interest was accruing in school, because I remember graduating and being like, I thought I took out $18,000.
Yeah.
Like, oh, well, it's been accruing interest in school the whole time. And I was like, oh, and it was like the first time that I realized, oh, this is how interest works, I guess.
Mhm.
And so for those first 5 years when I owed the 23K, I just paid the minimum on my debt because I just treated it like a bill. And then, you know, I had this chance to go to NYU and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to triple my debt load if I go. And then of course I went and I borrowed $58,000 to go to NYU, pretty much the price of tuition for a 1-year intensive master's.
Yeah.
And so that was tough because that was grad plus loans. And at the time that was 6.8% interest and 7.9% interest. Whereas the 23K, I think it was around 2.3%, 2.5%. So it was low.
Yeah.
So, you know, that was back in 2006. I'm dating myself here. But, you know, the interest rate was low on my undergrad.
Yeah.
But then for my graduate loans, 6.8 and 7.9% when you owe $58,000. And so what really kind of woke me up to this mountain that I was on, as you mentioned, was I calculated my daily interest. So people may not know that student loans accrue interest daily, which is wild. And so I calculated my daily interest and I realized I was paying $11 a day in interest. And I was like, this is over $300 a month in interest. This is like a round trip flight from LA to New York every month that I'm paying in interest. And I just kept thinking of all these things that I could spend money on.
Instead of student loans.
And like, it was driving me crazy. And then it's like, okay, if I make a payment, I think my minimum payment at that time was like $900 under standard repayment. And I was like, okay, so if I pay $900, $300 of it is already just, you know, feeding the beast, so to speak. And then only $600 is really, you know, going towards the principal balance. And it just really woke me up to this feeling of like going 2 steps forward, 1 step back. It's like with that daily interest, it's so hard to get ahead. And you really have to make large payments to really move forward and kind of get out of debt. And that's not easy for a lot of people. It wasn't easy for me for a long time.
Yeah. What do you have to say? Did you have any people who challenged you on prioritizing paying your student loans? Did people tell you things like, it's not that important, just pay the minimum payment, you'll pay it your whole life, it's not a big deal? Did you get any sort of pushback with people looking at your value system and how you should live your life?
Not explicitly, but I would say probably implicitly a little bit. But, you know, it was kind of the situation where I felt like all of my friends either had their parents pay for their schools or, you know, they had student loans and they just didn't care. And I was like, man, I would love to, I would love to just be that type of person that doesn't care. Like, I wish I could be that type of person, but I'm just not. And so, the way that manifested was, you know, I had to live like I was 20 again when I was 28. And so, you know, at 28, I had friends who were buying houses, who were getting married, who were getting their first, you know, new car, and like having all those kind of quote milestones that you have as you go older. And here I was like, I still have this, you know, small studio apartment. I don't have a car. I don't have health insurance. Like, I'm saying no to all of these, you know, invites to go out for sushi for a birthday dinner and all these other things. And it was really hard because you know, you feel like everyone's moving forward and you're like, man, I'm the brokest I've been in a long time. And I'm really hustling. And, you know, I would say I was side hustling there for like 7 days a week for a couple of years. And, you know, I didn't see my friends as much. And they were like, oh, you're always so busy, you know. And it was interesting because I felt like people were just kind of like, oh, wow, Melanie's always busy. She's really serious about this debt thing. And then it wasn't until I paid off my debt that everyone's like, wow, how'd you do it? And I was like, I've been doing it. I've been doing it. So it's been an interesting journey.
Nice.
That, you know what, on that aspect, I think it'd be a great time to talk about, if you were coaching some of our listeners now, Melanie, how would you help them like really talk about that social aspect? Like, how are they having that conversation? I'm really big in like role playing in the sense of like, you know, it can be really demoralizing to be like, man, like, do I always have to just say no? And like, eventually those invitations just stop coming because people think I don't want to help them.
Totally.
You deeper dive into that?
Yeah. So actually in my book, Dear Debt, I talk about how to be a frugal friend without being rude. I'm pretty sure it's a whole chapter.
Yeah.
And, to your point, like you can't just always say no, because then the invites will stop and then you're not going to have any friends. And so I always say that, you should say, thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it. That sounds lovely.
Yeah.
I don't think I can do that. However, would you like to come and have a potluck in the park with me? Would you like to have a Netflix party at home?
Yeah.
So it's not a no, but it's a counter offer, right? And I think like everyone can understand like, oh, it's not in my budget, but like people's feelings do get hurt when you say no. But if you have a counter offer, then you're showing that you're still interested in hanging out. You're still interested in preserving the friendship. It's just that this one activity is not in your budget. It's not something that you can do. So I always recommend having counter offers in your mind at all times. Like my go-to was potluck in the park. I knew the best deals for happy hour. I was like, there's $2 of grilled cheese. There's great cocktails. Like I could afford that. Let's go on a walk together. And, if your friends can't hang with that kind of stuff, they're probably not that great of friends anyways.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to say that, but it's like, if they can't hang with your frugal stuff, then, I think your friendship's probably based on something else. But so always, say no, and then have a counter offer right away or shortly thereafter, so that, they're not feeling like, oh, they never want to do anything with me. Like, why am I going to continue to ask them out?
Right.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That's great advice.
I think that's really good. In terms of the flip of the switch that you had, where would you say that came from? Was that something that you just learned growing up? Was that family? Like where did that desire to be like, you know what? I'm tired of this being a burden. Like, let's move forward.
Yeah. So it's actually pretty interesting. So as I mentioned, for the first 5 years with my undergrad debt, I just treated it like a bill.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't love it, but it didn't bother me. I just treated it like a bill. Even though I could have afforded to pay more than the minimum at that time, I didn't, because I just thought, oh, hello, minimum payment, that's what you pay. And so, I didn't really think about it. But then I took on so much more debt from NYU.
Yes.
And, I had done a lot to go to NYU. I had quit my nonprofit job here. I left my boyfriend to have a long distance relationship. I left my family. Like I left a lot to go to New York. And so I was like, I have to make this work in New York. Like I have to find a full-time job. I have to, make this work. And so I had graduated NYU in May. Then I had a ton of interviews that summer. I was still working part-time in arts administration. I was teaching in Harlem, children's theater. It was really wonderful. Yeah. And so I have a background in arts administration.
Which theater in Harlem?
Oh, I was teaching theater to children in Harlem.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, nice. Yeah. Sorry, I misspoke. Yeah, it was wonderful. It was through an after-school program, and I was like, I want like a teaching job or like an arts administration job, because that was what I was doing before.
Yep.
And I just kept going on interview, and nothing was working out. And then probably midway through the summer, I was like, okay, I should probably get my finances together and like see about this debt situation. And so a story I tell often is that I signed up for mint.com, which is a budgeting software. And, I put in all my debt and my income and expenses. And then I saw everything in black and white. And I was like, my income is so like grad student low. And my debt is so high. Like it was the first time that I just saw that 68,000 number like in writing. And I was like, I just was shell shocked. And literally 2 days later, even maybe the next day, I deleted mint.com. So, something I also mention in my book is that when you pay off debt, you often go through the 5 stages of grief. And so the first stage is denial. Like I was in complete denial. I was like, nope, can't handle this number. I'm just going to delete my mint.com account. And like anybody, knows, when you're in denial, eventually the truth will catch up to you. You can't keep denying for very long. And so I would say 4 months later, around Christmas time, 2011, I was like, I can't afford to pay my student loans and live in New York.
Yeah.
And I felt like I had to move to Portland. Granted, my then boyfriend was there, and so there was like personal reasons to move as well.
Mhm.
Obviously, it would be cheaper financially, but I
Mhm.
really wanted to stay in New York. I wanted to try it out longer, but I felt like I couldn't. And that was the first time that I realized my debt is making my life choices for me.
Yeah.
Like, that's what really woke me up, is I was like, I feel like I don't have a choice here. I feel like I have to move to Portland. I can't continue to be financially irresponsible and, you know, try to live in New York and pay my student loans when clearly the full-time job thing hasn't happened.
Yeah.
And like, that was my big wake-up call, is like, when you realize that you feel like your life has gone off track or that you don't have agency, you know, that's just like a huge wake-up call. And it's such a, you lose a lot of hope. And I think that's kind of where the depression started, is just like, I had this vision for my life, and then it was so much not like that at all. And, you know, it's difficult to have to pay off that amount of debt when you're making so little too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think there's so much to unpack there. I want to speak about the debt making a decision for you. That's huge. Like, how do you think there is almost a mirror of that experience happening for a large number of people during the coronavirus quarantine, where a lot of people's stability has changed, and people are, you know, quite frankly, having mass exodus out of major cities? What does that look like? And what do you think the psychology is behind that in terms of the decision you made back in early 2011 and what's happening now in 2020?
Yeah, you know, I think back in, you know, 2011, 2012, my psychology was really looking at the long term and realizing that I could not afford to live in New York as well as pay my student loans. And
Right.
so I knew that I was going to have to suffer in the short term if I wanted a better life in the long term.
Right.
And, you know, I think a lot of people right now are, you know, having financial crises with coronavirus. You know, a lot of people's incomes are down or gone completely. People still have student loans. Hopefully they're not paying them with the CARES Act for a while, try to save that money. But I think people are, you know, making different decisions now about where they can live. And I think it is a little bit different now, because now this remote workforce has opened up. And actually, I've been very curious and interested to see how cities are going to change, because I live in LA now, which that was one of my dreams to pay off debt, was to move back to LA, because I hated Portland. We'll go into that later if we want. But, you know, it's my dream to be back here in LA. And so I'm so happy to be here. But then part of me is like, why am I paying LA rent when I can't even enjoy LA for everything that it is? And, you know, I know a lot of people are feeling that way in New York, feeling that way in SF. And like, my job was already kind of location independent, so I could have moved, but I made that choice to be here. But then now seeing that so many people have that option too, is kind of like, what are we doing? And so I think that's going to affect a lot of people. And there's going to be a lot of people leaving cities, because if they don't need to be tied there for work,
Right.
you know, so I don't know what the future looks like in regards to cities and this mass exodus, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how all of that unfolds. And I think the landscapes in cities are going to be wildly different. My hope is it makes them a little more affordable.
Right. Exactly.
Come on, calm down, New York. Calm down, SF. Calm down, LA. Can we like level the playing field a little bit?
Exactly. I think that's what everybody's hoping. And then just a follow-up question to your earlier point, I think you touched on it a little bit, is that concept of the shell shock when you saw the price. What was that financial amnesia like? I think you spoke about this on your blog, but can you share with the audience what that was like?
Yeah, so I think I had like financial amnesia, because I knew what I borrowed, but like I never really thought about it. I just repressed it and pushed it down. And I'll be the first to admit, when I got into NYU and I was freaking out if I was going to triple my debt load or not, I had a lot of people, you know, say like, are you sure you want to quit your job and move to New York? Are you sure you want to take out all that debt? Are you sure you want to do this? I had a lot of people question me. And I will be the first to admit I was a stubborn little brat. And I was like, no, this is my dream school. I have to go. Like I was just, nobody could have told me anything. Like
Right.
I already made my choice. And so, you know, I think I had ridden on that like wave of hope
Right.
that this is my dream school, that like I was like, I'll do it at whatever cost because this is my dream.
Yep.
And then like after the dream happens and you're like, that wasn't quite exactly what my dream was. And then you're like, oh, and I still owe all of this money. And then you're trying to validate the dream with the money, and it's not like you thought.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the depression and anxiety come from. And you know, just kind of to extrapolate that lesson into life in general is I've realized as an adult that I don't know one person whose life has turned out how they thought it was going to turn out.
Oh, for
So
sure.
it's just like, oh wow, we've all had these visions of like, this is what's going to happen with my life. And literally everyone I've ever talked to is like, their life has never gone as they thought it was going to go.
Yeah, it brings up the saying, "What man plans and God laughs."
Right.
Right.
That's a good one. Yeah.
No, I mean it really does, and I think to jump in on that idea, I really like the concept of you identifying like how that really plays in your adult life. So like, what's I guess our little side bit that I want to make sure we don't gloss over, because we are the Student Loan Podcast, is what do you think that does in terms of, or let me rephrase, how do you think tuition and like the cost of education, because like you shouldn't want to defer your dream, right? Like I'm still a big believer in like, I fell into that trap too, don't worry. So I was like, yeah, this is where I want to go. This is what I want to do. And I'm going to take all this debt. Like, no worries. It'll all be good. And like, did not work out the way I expected. So I hear you. But like, do you think that the school should take some responsibility in terms of like charging these outrageous costs or fees for it?
I absolutely do. I personally think that, you know, kind of like the housing bubble hit way back when, like tuition's going to hit a bubble, and I hope it happens now, and I hope it pops. And like with the coronavirus, I mean, it's been apparently clear, like, oh wait, am I going to pay 50 grand a year to just do Zoom meetings? Like, I don't think so. Right. And so like, I think now more than ever, it's been abundantly clear that tuition prices are exorbitant, and they've been exorbitant for years. And like I said, when I started in 2013, the conversation was just bubbling. And I would say over the past few years, it's finally getting the attention it deserves. And everyone's realized that the student loan bubble is, you know, insane. And so many people are suffering. And a large part of that is because of tuition costs. And it's just wild to me, because when you look at wages over the past 30 years, wages have not kept up with inflation for around 30 years. Look at the minimum wage. The minimum wage hasn't even moved for 10 years. And so it's like, you look at that, and if the goal of going to school is to get a job, but then these jobs have wages that haven't kept up with inflation for 30 years, this doesn't make any sense to me. It literally just makes no sense. I think it's predatory, to be honest. And I actually really wanted to be a professor when I first went to NYU. I had dreams of going to get a PhD. And then halfway through my master's, I was like, I'm not down with this white ivory tower BS. Like, I just like, I'm just not down with it. Like, I like talking about ideas. I like the intellectualism, but like, I want to help real people. I want to like do things like on the ground, you know? And actually, like, ironically, I feel like my work has been probably better read on my blog than if I were writing in academia. And, you know, I just realized I didn't want to go down that route, and that, yeah, there's like larger systemic systems. That's kind of redundant, but you know what I'm saying? There's larger systems that are creating this profit center where they want to think that students are, you know, benefiting from that. But really, it's a top-down approach. There's a lot of people getting very rich off this high-priced tuition. And then now with coronavirus, it's just really highlighting the inequities. And I think people now are really thinking, like, is this really worth it? And in my fantasy, all of this just pops right now. the tuition goes down, rents in New York and LA and SF go down if they want to keep us here. Like, I just hope, like, can we just reset? Can we just have
start all over again?
Like a restart, because it's just not sustainable anymore. Like, it wasn't sustainable before, but now for real, it's not sustainable. So I absolutely think schools, have a responsibility to lower the tuition. I also do understand that they have a lot of office politics to deal with too, dealing with administrators and professors and making students happy and parents happy and recruiting. And it's like, there's a whole game. And like any organization, there's politics and larger influences, that we don't understand.
Absolutely.
Sure. Well said. Huge. I really appreciate that. I would love to get your thoughts on some exercises that you think people can do to kind of strengthen their mental tolerance of student loans while they're paying it off. So just the habits that you have to have, the discipline that you have to have to pay off a large amount of student loan debt is difficult and challenging. And since you really do specialize in that mental health aspect, I would love to hear your thoughts on some ways that people can strengthen their mental health.
Well, first of all, I would love for people to write a Dear Debt letter.
Yeah.
So, write your own breakup letter to debt. I always tell people it could be whatever you want. Like, it could be funny or depressing or whatever. Just write a breakup letter to debt. A lot of people have said that it's really cathartic. And I know for me, it was just nice to get my feelings on the page and kind of to anthropomorphize debt into this person. Just was like, dear debt, we're over. I never want to see you again. Like, it's fun, and it kind of takes back your agency and power. So I definitely recommend writing a Dear Debt letter. You can send it to me or not. I also recommend reminding yourself that your net worth is not your self-worth. So I think I felt super depressed because I was like, I'm not making a lot of money and I'm in all of this debt. Like, I'm worth negative, whatever. And I just felt like that means that I'm not worth a lot, because in our capitalist society, our income and our salary literally does tell us how much we're worth in a specific kind of way.
Yep.
So it's really hard to not take that personally if you're not making a wage that is livable or that can afford your debt payments. And then, now with maturity and therapy, I've realized, like, I am worth something whether I make money or not. I'm worth something whether I'm productive or not. I'm worth something because I'm alive. And so, I remind people to separate their self-worth and their net worth. I like to always say people, you are not a loan. You are not a loan. A lot of people, just think that they are their debt and just put two and two together. And it's like, we have to separate that a little bit so that, you realize that you are worth so much more. Some tips that were kind of like fun little mental hacks that helped me get out of debt. So I wrote my debt number on a Post-it and put it on my debit and credit card. So every time I was going to spend, it's like, there's my debt number.
Yeah,
cool.
That's such a good life hack.
Yeah, so that was a good one. And then I also created a Pinterest board of like my debt-free dream list. So something that a lot of people who owe a lot of money will experience debt fatigue. Debt fatigue is when you're making huge payments. Like, I realized, I was like, I have to make 4-figure payments for years. Like, it's not going to be 6 months like some of these other stories. Like, it's going to be years. And then when you realize, like, I have to pay more than $1,000 a month for years, like, it's really depressing and demoralizing, and you can just get super fatigued. But I created this debt-free dream list of what is my life going to look like once I'm debt-free, because I'm never going to be back in this situation again. I'd rather be a broke young person than a broke old person. And I'd rather suffer a little bit now and try to enjoy my life then. And so I was like, I want to move back to LA because I hate Portland. I want to take my mom to Italy because she's never been to Europe. I want to adopt cats because I love cats, but like, I can't really afford it if I'm paying off debt. And so that was just like my motivation. I would go on Pinterest and be like, this is what my dream life is going to look like. And I just kept thinking, you know, that's not my life now. That's what will be my life. That's what I'm working towards. Even though I'm tired, I'm upset, I'm, you know, exhausted and hustling all the time. But I was able to do that. You know, I was able to move back to LA 6 months after I paid off my debt. A month after I moved back, I went to Europe with my mom and had a little debt-free celebration. It was fantastic. And then about 3 years ago, I adopted my 2 kitties, Miles and Thelonious. And, you know, so I love to say that I've accomplished everything on my debt-free dream list. And I'm so much happier. And like, obviously, it's not like all of my problems financially or otherwise suddenly disappeared, but it's a huge weight off my shoulders. And, you know, I have this opportunity now to spend more money on the high cost of living in LA. Because actually, I should bring that up because that was a very conscious choice. So as I mentioned, I hated Portland. It was too white and too gray for me. And I was just like, I hate it here. Like, it depresses me so much. But I realized I'm paying $400 in rent. There's no way I can do that back in LA. And so like, I made a conscious choice. I was like, I have to pay off my debt before I leave. So even though I hated it and I like didn't love it, that was a conscious choice because I was like, I need to take advantage of this lower cost of living. And then once I'm debt free, then sure, I can, you know, double my rent in LA. And that will be, you know, something that I can't afford technically because I'm not making 4-figure debt payments anymore. And so sometimes you do have to do things you don't like for a little longer than you like, but then, you know, that's what kept me motivated is like, I know that I'm going to achieve these things sooner rather than later. And so that's, you know, been good.
Have you continued the conscious spending mentality in your post-student loan debt life? Do you still have debt in other areas or have you continued the same approach?
So I haven't really had debt since. I will say, like, I've put some stuff on the credit card for my business, and, you know, maybe paid it off in full in 2 months or something. But haven't really had debt, and I want to remain debt-free as much as possible.
Cool.
And I do, you know, really try to maintain conscious spending. And, you know, what I had to do after I paid off my debt is reallocate that money. You know, okay, this is going to an emergency fund, this is going to investing, and then this is going to stuff that I just couldn't afford before. And I'm going to therapy and I'm going to boxing. And, you know, really having those kind of 3 tiers of like saving, investing, and personal development, right? And so I was able to use my money and just allocate it that way. But I always tell people that it's really important that you figure out what you're going to do with that money that you were throwing to debt into something else, because it's so easy just to be like, I'm debt free and just like, I'm so rich. And then like suddenly you're just spending like you're a baller. And then you're like, wait, how come I haven't saved any money? And it's like, you need to have a plan and just like automatically reroute it, because it's just so easy for lifestyle inflation to occur and for you to be mindless because you're not focused on this intense goal anymore. So I definitely recommend people, you know, creating a vision of what their debt-free life is going to look like and reallocate that money right away.
Nice.
Very good.
Where do you go from here? So you've accomplished so much. You've paid off a huge mountain of debt. You know, what is your next vision for your next dream board, if you will?
Yeah, so actually I've done a few things since paying off debt that I haven't mentioned. So after I paid off my debt and I wrote my book, so, you know, 2016, I was kind of like, I have this debt blog and I have this book, but I'm no longer in debt. So I'm not like super passionate about writing this blog anymore, sadly, because I'm not in debt. And so I kind of had like a little identity crisis and was like, what am I going to do? I don't want to like just be a debt blogger anymore. And so at that time, it was right around election time. And, you know, there was a lot of like stuff with the Me Too movement. And then I teamed up with a friend and we realized we really wanted to create an event for women and money.
Nice.
And so in 2017, I launched Lola Retreat. Lola Retreat is a women and money event, and it's held over a weekend. We've done 4 events in the past 3 years. So we did the first one in August 2017 in Portland, second one, April 2018 in New York, February 2019 in LA, and August 2019 in Seattle. Nice. So we've done 4 events all over the country, and it's been so wonderful to connect with about 60 women, and we go over budgeting, paying off debt, saving. We go through why diet culture is making you broke, how to buy a house when you're single, how to deal with divorce, how to deal with estate planning. You know, really the nitty gritty stuff that's going to be actionable and support women, because I really believe that though feminism has done so much for us over the past 50 years, that economic, financial portion really is the last thing that we really need to get parity for, you know? And so even though there's systemic things that need to change for that to happen, in my very own small way, I want to empower women to be able to manage their money. And I think now women are facing different challenges and different relationships with money and different relationships with people than they ever have. I mean, women are becoming the breadwinner more and more, and people don't know how to necessarily deal with that in a relationship. You know, there's more single moms, there's more home ownership. There's so many different things that there's just not a rule book, or a lot of people, you know, who have gone through this before. And so the purpose of Lola Retreat is really to connect like-minded women to A, learn about money, and B, you know, have conversations that you're not having anywhere else. And obviously Lola Retreat's on hiatus because of COVID, but we are having some digital hangouts where we just connect with people online, get them together to talk about money. And then actually this past year, I kind of had another extension from Dear Debt. So what I really learned with Dear Debt was that the topic of money and mental health was way more prevalent than I thought. And I realized this after the first year when someone had Googled, I want to kill myself because of debt.
No.
And yeah, someone did that, and it just broke my heart. And so I wrote a post as if I was speaking to that person. I say, you know, please seek help. Like, debt is not a death sentence. And because I wrote about it, then I kept getting more search traffic. And, you know, over the past 5 years, I've actually done a suicide prevention blog tour in September, which is now. So I got my personal finance blogger friends to write blog posts about this very topic, suicide, debt, and depression, because no one was talking about it. And so, you know, I've really been a pioneer for that over the past 5 years. And I hate to say that that's still one of my #1 search traffic terms is, you know, suicide and debt. And so it kind of came to this place where people were like, oh, mental health and money, talk to Melanie. Oh, you want to talk about mental health and money, talk to Melanie. Like, it seemed like people just kept thinking about me that way. And so I was like, let me just lean into this and realized that mentalhealthandwealth.com was available. So I bought it. And then, you know, I never really thought of starting a podcast. Like, people have asked me over the years, oh, are you going to do a podcast? And I was like, no, I have nothing to talk about. You know, I'll be a guest and that's fine. And then, you know, I was like, but I really can talk about money and mental health forever. And there's so many different angles. And so I launched the Mental Health and Wealth Show in February. And we've had topics about financial anxiety, how grief affects your finances, postpartum depression, and, you know, money and mental health, you know, being Black and bipolar, you know, so many different kind of interviews with people who are sharing their real stories. And so that's been really beautiful to do. And it's been interesting because it's like, oh yeah, this is what it's like to be a beginner again and start new, you know, trying to get subscribers and followers and listeners. And it reminds me of, you know, early Dear Debt days, 2013, when you're just like, okay, I want to like reach people more than my mom, and, you know, starting a new project. But it's been really good. So, you know, Dear Debt still exists. I don't update it that often, but we do have, you know, resources on there. And my focus right now is really on Lola Retreat, but primarily mental health and wealth right now, both the podcast and the website.
I really appreciate that you really tackle an issue that I hope, at least from my perspective, I see it in our region really gaining a lot of traction in some institutions that you normally wouldn't hear about mental health. So to me, it's a sign of good things to come. What about the idea of, is there like a common thread or theme that you've seen through Dear Debt and through Lola Retreat and with the podcast, where if you're speaking directly to a listener right now and they're in that low, dark place, how do you help them based on all the years of experience that you've had, you know, really trying to focus in on that issue? What would you say to them, Melanie?
I would say that these feelings are completely normal. So don't feel bad that you're having them. I would also say that you don't need to internalize that so much, because we are more than our debt. And then I would also try to give them, tangible advice. I do like to hear people's like experiences, like what kind of debt they have, because obviously that will affect my recommendations. I tell people I'm not technically a financial professional, so just take this with a grain of salt, but obviously my advice would be different if they have federal loans versus private loans, if they have credit cards versus an auto loan or whatever. And I try to just provide resources. And so what I find myself being an ear to listen to somebody, because a lot of people message me and say, nobody knows that I'm in this much debt. I can't tell my wife. I can't tell my family. Like, I feel so alone. And so, and even people at Lola Retreat, they come to the event and they're like, I can't talk to anybody about this. And so I feel like my role through all of Dear Debt, Lola Retreat, and Mental Health and Wealth is to break down the taboo and to start the conversation.
Yeah.
And for people that are really in that dark place, I would say don't make a permanent solution to a temporary problem. Even though it feels like it's going to be forever, it won't. I also would say that it's important to have a mindset shift to actually pay off debt. And that's probably one of the hardest parts. Like, for example, I always thought, student loans with a good debt, or like everybody has student loans, so it doesn't matter, right? Even though those might technically be, quote, true in some ways, those beliefs were not helping me. Those beliefs kept me stuck. So I was like, everyone has debt. Student loans with a good debt. So I just didn't think about it. And then I really had to release those beliefs to be like, you know what? No debt is good. And that's what's going to help me. And so I had to ditch those beliefs and just be like, no debt's good. And I just need to go full force with this. But it took a while, and it, changing your whole money script. There's this whole thing of financial psychology. There's a whole field of financial therapy, actually. And, we're all born with these money scripts that are kind of pre-programmed in our head based on our family, our culture, our friends, our upbringing, everything. And so it's important to investigate, where is this thought coming from? Because it's probably not technically from you.
Yeah.
And, I think it's important to investigate that. And then something, kind of a thread that I've seen through Dear Debt, Lola, and Mental Health and Wealth is that the overwhelming majority of people, whether they're in debt, they haven't achieved their goals, whatever the circumstance may be, is that they are filled with guilt and shame around money. That's just been the most common theme that I've seen, is people feel so much guilt that they haven't made the right decisions, that they keep messing up, that they took on so much debt. People feel a lot of shame for how much debt they're in, or how they can't seem to get it together, or, whatever. And so that's been really fascinating for me to see, and, me try to figure out how to address that with people in a different way, because it's so prevalent. And, obviously if we want to manage our finances, we need to release those negative emotions that are going to block us from actually making progress.
Well said.
Very well said.
Well said. I am so impressed by your ability to really hone in on something so foundational and such a catalyst for people actually acting on paying off their student loan debt. So thank you so much for sharing your story, for going deep with us, and really getting specific about ways that people can take action. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Of course. Thank you.
Is there outside of the Lola Retreat, the Mental Health and Wealth podcast, is there any message or way that you want folks to reach out to you? Because I just want to make sure that people are using your resources, because it really is something that needs to be out there for people to find.
Absolutely.
Yeah, people can find me at deardebt.com, lolaretreat.com, mentalhealthandwealth.com, and I'm at Melanie Lockert on Twitter and Instagram. I'm very much online, and happy to chat with borrowers and people who want help and inspiration.
For sure. Thank you so much, Melanie. Melanie Lockert, for all of you listeners out there, we appreciate you so much for taking the time to be here with us. And most importantly, sharing your story to help others that may be in that dark space to help them achieve the same goal that you've achieved, and having that free moment of being debt free. So Melanie, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to supporting more of your causes and seeing how else you impact the world.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that was a great episode with Melanie. I'm so happy that she was able to join us. And I hope that you were able to take something away from that episode, because I know I did. But before we go, if you want to find out more about what was said on the podcast, you can visit our website at thestudentloanpodcast.com/episode 3. Once again, that's studentloanpodcast.com/episode 3. But before you go, remember we said there was a prize at the beginning of the episode? I think Daphne has some more information on that, right?
Oh, yes, we do have a prize for one lucky winner. We will be sharing the Dear Debt book with one lucky listener. All you have to do is review and rate the Student Loan Podcast on Apple or Stitcher and take a screenshot of your review. Then subscribe to our Instagram at the Student Loan Podcast and tag us in your Instagram review screenshot post. We will choose one lucky winner at the end of this week and announce the winner in 2 episodes.
Sounds like a plan. Daphne, I hope you enjoyed that episode, and I will see you soon.
Awesome. Talk soon, guys. Thank you for listening.
Bye.
Bye-bye.